Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Let's begin with the Chinese economy. This week, Chinese stock markets have been declining, showcasing just how disappointed the markets are with the third plenum announcements last week. Yesterday, Chinese stocks suffered their biggest decline in 6 months. The onshore benchmark CSI 300 index closed 2.1% lower, following a 0.7% drop in the previous session. UK-based The Financial Times writes that the steep losses, quote, are likely to be a taste of what may come without state support in the market that has lost momentum amid China's economic troubles and geopolitical risks, end quote. Investors had looked into the third plenum for a clearer policy roadmap to end the property crisis and revive consumption, it adds, but the details released so far have fallen short of expectations. Meanwhile, Hong Kong-based Bloomberg economists argue today that China's new plan to fix debt woes is seen as marginal at best. We remember that Beijing signalled at a plenum last week that it was willing to share its tax revenue with regional governments while easing their spending burden, one of the country's biggest tax revamps in decades. A core part of the plan involves passing the proceeds of consumption levies, which currently goes entirely to the central government, to cities and towns. Quote, but the consumption tax generated just 1.6 trillion yuan, $220 billion last year. That pales in comparison to the record 15 trillion yuan deficit accumulated by provinces, cities and towns across China last year, with a similarly dire budget shortfall anticipated for 2024. End quote. Citigroup Inc. economists, in a note published this week, explain, quote, the fiscal reform plan reads more like a realistic but marginal remedy with a grip on local government debt still tight, end quote. Chang Shu, chief China economist for Bloomberg Economics, argues, quote, the plenum discussed plans to better align local government spending and resources, particularly at the city and county levels, as expected. This is a welcome sign. Wide budget deficits and heavy debt loads are long-standing issues for local governments and are impeding growth and undermining financial stability, end quote. ANZ Bank economist Xing Zhaopeng explains, quote, while the shared consumption tax may only account for a limited amount of local government income at the beginning, I would expect it to be adjusted to offer more funds to local governments. The goal would be to keep local government income stable. I don't expect significant increases, but it would be a way to ensure local government income levels do not drop, end quote. Next up, and finally for the economic updates, 2 of China's leading fund managers have capped staff's income levels annually and will claw back any excess in the first such measure to hit the industry under a government austerity drive. UK-based Reuters, citing 5 people with direct knowledge of the matter, reports that China Merchants Fund Management told its staff last month that their annual pay would be capped at 3 million yuan, $413,000 for this year, and demanded that they give back anything more than that from the last year too. The move was implemented in June. The clawback of last year's pay to comply with the cap would affect about 60 executives and fund managers at China Merchants, 2 of the sources said. Needless to say, this won't be good for confidence across the sector. A sales executive at one of the fund houses reportedly told Reuters, quote, nobody going forward wants to sell the products to raise assets. We can lie flat to just keep the job because we would fear the money paid will be clawed back, end quote. Next up, in an interesting development reflecting the current nature and state of Chinese social media, within the first 48 hours after US President Joe Biden announced that he would exit the presidential race and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris, conspiracy theories about his health, why he quit, and criticism of Harris have rapidly spread on Chinese social media. Substack publication Wen Haoma's new blog, Wen Hao is a US-based Voice of America journalist, published a piece today discussing what happened. Let's examine some of the piece, which we're now quoting selected excerpts from directly. Although the announcement was made at local time 2 a.m. in China, it quickly became one of the most talked about topics on the microblogging platform Weibo. Then misinformation followed. One popular conspiracy theory claimed that the White House has concealed information on Biden's actual health and that the president is either in critical conditions or already dead. One Weibo post that has garnished over 4,000 likes wrote that rumors have it that Biden is terminally ill and added a screenshot as evidence. One netizen commented that now is Harris's chance to send US troops to Ukraine, cancel the election in November and become a wartime president. On Tuesday, an X account named Global Press claimed that Biden is currently in hospice care and is unlikely to survive the night. The post has been shared on Weibo, getting thousands of likes. The lowered US flag on top of the US Capitol building has also added fuel to the speculation that Biden is dead, which first appeared on X and has now spread to Weibo. Biden was forced to quit due to pressure from the deep state, one online commentator on US politics wrote on Weibo. Back then they put Obama in the position of the president. Now they want to put Harris there for DEI purposes, she added. Jin Canrong, an international relations professor at Renmin University of China, said in a recent video in reaction to Biden dropping out of the race that Biden was a man chosen by the deep state because he was rather easy to control. Some Chinese nationalist commentators say that Biden had to withdraw from the race because he was merely a puppet of other democratic leaders, with one commentator saying, "The so-called democracy and freedom are nothing but lies. Everything is controlled by the bosses." Here ends the direct quote. This piece gives us a good peek into some of the rhetoric within China on popular social media platforms surrounding Biden's decision to drop out of the race. Next up, China's Middle East policy. But just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode, I have a huge favor to ask. That is simply to like and subscribe. It's just 2 clicks of the mouse, but it's a huge help for the channel and will mean you're on top of the most up-to-date analysis as it's released. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody. Next up, Beijing is trumpeting what it argues is another win in its Middle East policy and global order ambitions, with the signing of the so-called Beijing Declaration on Ending Division and Strengthening Palestinian National Unity. This is the first time that all 14 Palestinian factions gathered in Beijing to hold talks for reconciliation. The meeting marked the latest attempt to heal the Palestinian national schism that has defined all attempts at mediation since 2007, when the Islamic group Hamas seized the Gaza Strip in a brief civil war with Fatah. According to state media, quote, "The core outcome is the affirmation of the Palestinian Liberation Organization as the sole legitimate representative of all Palestinian people. The biggest highlight is the agreement on establishing an interim government of national reconciliation focusing on the post-conflict reconstruction of Gaza, and the strongest call is for truly establishing an independent state of Palestine in accordance with relevant UN resolutions." End quote. Analysts say that the agreement would prove hard to implement, with complications including the deep enmity between Palestinian factions and Western opposition to Hamas having any role in governance. No timetable was declared for implementation of this declaration. The heads of the Fatah delegation and the Hamas delegation delivered remarks on behalf of the Palestinian factions. They noted that, quote, "China holds an important place in the heart of Palestinian people," end quote, and expressed, quote, "sincere appreciation for President Xi and China's unchanging, firm support and selfless assistance to Palestine over a long period of time," end quote. The Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative, one of the 14 factions to sign the accord, told Qatar-based Al Jazeera the agreement goes, quote, "much further," end quote, "than any other reached in recent years." He said its 4 main elements are the establishment of an interim national unity government, the formation of unified Palestinian leadership ahead of future elections, the free election of a new Palestinian National Council, and a general declaration of unity in the face of ongoing Israeli attacks. Moussa Abu Marzouk, a senior Hamas official, declared that, quote, "historic moments," end quote, were underway. However, Israel-based outlet Haaretz reports that a senior Fatah official said the joint statement was mainly, quote, "to show respect to the Chinese hosts," End quote. US-based The Washington Post writes that, quote, Palestinian political experts generally dismiss the agreement as a rehash of several previous statements of reconciliation, including a 2022 accord signed by 14 Palestinian factions in Algeria. To date, none of these efforts have produced any lasting changes in the Hamas-Fatah rift. End quote. Similarly, Jihad Harb, an analyst of Palestinian affairs speaking to US-based The New York Times, expressed, quote, what happened in China isn't significant. There aren't any indications that Hamas and Fatah intend to end the split between them. End quote. Adding that the statement does not address a key sticking point, security control over Gaza. Fatah has demanded that all weapons be under the authority of one unified security force and government, while Hamas has said it will not dismantle its military wing. Israel's foreign minister dismissed the deal on X, and Saeed Azman Saeed Akhman Nawawi, chief executive of the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies in Malaysia, told Japan-based Nikkei Asia, quote, the reconciliation of Hamas and Fatah, which represents the National Palestinian Authority, will always be welcomed. But, as with any peace process, the key is to overcome each side's differences, or there will be no peace forever. End quote. Jonathan Chanza, a senior vice president for research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington, argues, quote, multiple attempts to broker reconciliation by multiple actors have been unsuccessful. China is not likely to end this feud. In all likelihood, Beijing knows this, but the optics are important to Iran and the Arab world. Thus, going through the motions of diplomacy is important to Beijing. End quote. Indeed, Beijing has been trumpeting the news of its declaration, seeking to paint itself as a peacemaker, and the US as a warmonger. State-run Global Times writes today, for example, quote, it seems like China is now becoming a hot place for different countries who are suffering from chaos and wars around the globe to seek peaceful solutions. The latest and upcoming events on the Palestinian issue and the Ukraine crisis prove that China, which always upholds its stance for peace, is not just talking the talk, but is also taking concrete actions to contribute to political settlements, despite the US and US-led military alliances like NATO continuing to add uncertainties and obstacles. China will continue with its efforts to ensure that peace processes in different regions of the world can be delivered eventually. End quote. And Zhu Weile, Honorary Director of the Middle East Institute at Shanghai International Studies University and Professor at the China-Arab Reform and Development Research Center, in an interview with state media, made the triumphalist statement, quote, the East is rising and the West is declining. I personally feel that China's proactive role in Middle East diplomacy is very clear. It is not waiting but actively leading. Such actions are welcomed by Middle Eastern countries. China is actually in the leading role in the global south. In the future, in any regional or even global major events, there will be China's voice and attitude. End quote. I would very much like to hear your thoughts on any of the updates we covered today, but especially this third development in the Middle East. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Wednesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.